My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for the past 5 years of my marriage, I carried a weight in my heart that I couldn't quite put into words. My husband, David, was a good man by many people's standards. He worked hard, provided for the family, and never failed to pay the bills on time. But behind closed doors, life wasn't as simple or as fulfilling as it seemed from the outside. When I first married David, I thought I had found my forever. We met in college, and while sparks didn't exactly fly, he was steady, reliable, and kind in his own way. I mistook stability for happiness, and over time, I began to realize that what I truly longed for wasn't being met. It wasn't about luxury or even about romance. It was about being seen, being heard, and being understood. And those were things my husband struggled to give. The years rolled by, and the distance between us grew. David buried himself in work, often coming home late, exhausted and uninterested in conversation. Whenever I tried to share how I felt, about my day, about my worries, about my dreams, his responses were short and distracted. "We'll talk later," he would say, or "I'm tired, Sarah." Later never seemed to come. I felt invisible in my own home, like a shadow moving around him rather than a partner standing beside him. It was during those years of quiet loneliness that I met Mark Turner, my neighbor across the street. Mark had moved into the neighborhood with his daughter, Emily, after losing his wife to cancer. From the start, there was something approachable about him. He always waved when he saw me outside, always asked how I was doing, and never made me feel like I was a burden. At first, our conversations were small, just casual neighborly exchanges about the weather, the garden, or the neighborhood watch meetings. But over time, they grew deeper. I found myself confiding in him about little frustrations, things I never bothered to tell David anymore because I knew he wouldn't listen. Mark, on the other hand, listened with patience. He had this calm presence, a way of making me feel like my words mattered. It wasn't long before Mark started noticing things about me that even David overlooked. He noticed when I changed my hairstyle, when I seemed unusually tired, or when my smile didn't quite reach my eyes. He asked questions and waited for the answers. He remembered details like how I loved old mystery novels or how I couldn't start my morning without coffee brewed just a little stronger than most people liked it. One rainy afternoon, after a particularly difficult argument with David about his long hours at work, I found myself sitting on the porch steps, staring at the storm clouds. My heart felt heavy, as though all the unspoken words of the past 5 years were pressing down on me. That's when Mark walked over, holding an umbrella. Without a word, he sat beside me and handed me a cup of tea he had just made. We sat there in silence for a while, the rain tapping rhythmically against the umbrella until I finally let the tears fall. Mark didn't try to fix anything or offer hollow advice. He just let me cry. He let me feel, without judgment or discomfort. And in that moment, I realized he had given me something David hadn't in years: emotional space. A safe place to simply be myself. That day was the beginning of a shift. I started to understand that what Mark gave me wasn't grand gestures or promises. It was consistency, empathy, and understanding. Over the next few months, he helped me with things David never thought to notice. When the faucet in the kitchen started leaking, David brushed it off, saying he'd get to it someday. But Mark came over the next morning and fixed it without making a big deal out of it. When Emily had a school play, he invited me to watch, and afterward, we laughed about the kids forgetting their lines. When I felt overwhelmed with loneliness, he simply reminded me that I wasn't as alone as I thought. It wasn't about Mark replacing David, because that wasn't the point. What touched me deeply was how he did the one thing my husband hadn't been able to do in 5 years. He made me feel valued. He reminded me of the person I had been before the silence of my marriage swallowed me whole. And I loved it, not in the way people might think, but in a way that restored something inside me. Still, I struggled with guilt. Part of me wondered if I was betraying David by finding comfort in someone else's presence. But the truth was, there was nothing inappropriate about it. Mark never crossed boundaries. He never disrespected my marriage. What he did was offer the kind of human kindness that everyone deserves but not everyone receives. The turning point came one evening when David came home late again, distracted and irritable. I tried to tell him about a problem I was having with my car, but he brushed me off without listening. Later, I found myself outside again, and Mark noticed. "You deserve to be heard, Sarah," he told me gently. Those words echoed in my mind for days. I realized then that the problem wasn't Mark, and it wasn't even really David. It was the fact that I had silenced my own needs for too long. I had allowed myself to fade into the background of my marriage, thinking it was selfish to want more. But what Mark did, what David couldn't, was remind me that I had the right to want love, attention, and respect. That realization changed everything.